I want to talk to you guys about how people have tried to shoehorn the war in Ukraine into the struggle between Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Israel and Netanyahu's government. Obviously, the topics of things like occupation and colonialism, there are some areas where these two wars could intersect in the fact that they're both violent. Missiles are used in both of these wars. Occupation is a hot topic in both of them. Colonialism is a hot topic. Settler colonialism is a hot topic. But there's not too many similarities. The way the wars are being fought, the history of the conflict, there's significant differences that make shoehorning this war into this other war, I think, pretty difficult. And 99% of it that I've seen has been people trying to drag this in order to try to either undercut support for Ukraine, try to go after Russia in a weird way. And I'm not saying you can't go after Russia, but in a way that we don't have evidence of, and this is what we're going to talk about in a moment. And just spread genuinely bad takes, trying to compare these two wars, or trying to say that supporting Ukraine is undercutting support for Israel. And so I wanted to go through a list of bad takes and different things I've seen trying to connect these two wars. The first one is the easiest one for me, because this is footage of a Israeli tank being targeted by Hamas. I think this was blown up about 2 days ago. And we got a few people reacting to this footage, seeing a drone dropping a grenade and coming to the conclusion, aha, there is only one possible explanation for this. Russia. Let me read this tweet. Russia is clearly behind this. No ally of Hamas except of Russia has experience of using bomb-dropping drones against modern battle tanks. Only Russia could train Hamas in this. No. Other terror groups have used stuff like this before. Other resistance groups have done stuff like this before. The rebels in Myanmar, who have very few international allies, were able to figure out dropping bombs from drones. And so if the rebels from Myanmar were able to do it basically on their own, using online guides and the diaspora, then I do think that Hamas, with much more funding, much more international attention, and being allies with countries like Iran, allied with groups like Hezbollah, and working, at least in this operation, usually they're feuding quite a lot, working with another organization called Palestinian Islamic Jihad. There are so many different places that they could have tried to go and get this type of training. I remember that there was a suicide drone attack in Sudan, and it bore a bunch of signs that it could have been tied to Ukrainian intelligence. From the way the drone attacked, which is something that if a Ukrainian was trying to teach somebody to use a suicide drone, it'd be very similar to that. But it wasn't just that. It was also that the controller had Ukrainian writing on it. Is that the Ukrainians were hinting at them being involved. There was more evidence here. There is nothing here except Russia knows how to use a drone-dropped bomb. Hamas knows how to use a drone-dropped bomb. That's it. That's where the comparisons end. So no, we do not know that this was Russia. Next, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Listen to what Marjorie Taylor Greene has to say. Her proud moment as Israel was getting bombarded by rockets and the retaliatory bombing campaigns were starting. This is what Greene wanted to talk about. She wanted to talk about how great she was in challenging aid to Ukraine. And she was able to get an impeachment inquiry lost, as footage of the Gaza Strip being bombed is shown in the background. Look at this.
I want to remind everyone that we barely control the majority of the House, and that's only 1/3 of the federal government. What happened last week, I completely disagree with. It was 8 Republicans joining with all the Democrats in the House and basically throwing the gavel on the floor and saying it's now up for grabs at anyone that wants it. This is not a serious thing to do when you control the House of Representatives. And no matter how you feel about Kevin McCarthy, I can tell you I was getting things accomplished accomplished because through Kevin McCarthy, I was able to get the Ukraine money taken out of the defense bill. And I fought very hard for that. And I'm proud that that happened. I also got an impeachment inquiry launched, which without a vote in the House of Representatives. And that was because I urged him to do it.
The impeachment inquiry turned up nothing. And about the aid for Ukraine, I've seen some people trying to ally with Marjorie Taylor Greene, like some very far left, fringe left, I would say tanky left people trying to ally either with Marjorie Taylor Greene or saying we'll work with her on this issue. I just want everybody to know that Marjorie Taylor Greene is not interested in any decrease in military spending whatsoever, like not in the slightest. She specifically does not want our weapons being put towards a good cause in liberating Ukrainian territory and upholding transatlantic security. She doesn't want that. And so she's bragging as another country is getting bombarded by rockets and the Palestinians are getting bombed to all hell. She's bragging about stopping air defense systems that save civilian lives. That's what she's bragging about doing as we're watching civilians get torn to shreds right to her right. Just saying. And this doesn't mean that she's going to be saving taxpayers a single dollar, because again, she wants to keep defense spending right where it is and or increase it. Next clip, Lauren Boebert. This is something I saw a lot of over the weekend, and this doesn't have to do with Ukraine, but I still wanted to bring this up because I didn't have another opportunity to bring it up. Everybody's talking about the $6 billion that we unfroze of Iran's old money. And here's Lauren Boebert talking about it, blaming what's going on in Israel between Israel, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Hamas on Joe Biden. This is what she has to say. What did you think would happen when you set $6 billion to Iran? So, first off, you want to know how I know this is fishy and how I knew it was fishy before I even thought about it? If this had any impact on Palestinian Islamic Jihad or Hamas, don't you think Israelis would have mentioned it? Don't you think Netanyahu would have mentioned it? Netanyahu's had a pretty frosty relationship with Joe Biden. I doubt he would pull his punches just to save face with him. I don't think Ben Gvir has any interest, that maniac, in pulling punches on Biden or the Biden family. So you first would want to listen to the Israelis as to what they think caused this, if you're going to pin this on the United States. And they have nothing to say about this. It's only American partisan hacks that are bringing this up. That's the first thing. Second thing, Iran hasn't even gotten the $6 billion yet. Not only is it not American money that we're giving them, it's their own money that we're unfreezing in exchange for a prisoner swap. But it's still in a Qatari bank account. It still has yet to be transferred over. It is physically impossible for Iran to have taken the money that we unfroze and use it for these attacks. And in fact, this stuff happened so recently that I've seen some people argue, well, that's okay, maybe that's not true, but maybe they budgeted differently and they were able to budget another $6 billion because they knew that $6 billion is going to be unfrozen. And that money that wasn't given to them, but the money that they would have spent on other things that they're not going to be able to spend on this. Not only is this way roundabout, way like going left side and center, is that way different than what Lauren Boebert was saying. But also, if we're using this logic, if this is the logic we're using, then doesn't this mean like any aid to anyone anywhere, as long as it's a pretty bad government that's doing a bad thing, could potentially be a contribution to that? For example, let's say that there's a gigantic tornado in the United States that kills 100,000 people, horrible disaster. And Cuba wants to send some of its doctors over to help, or Germany, or any of these countries. Would it be bad for them to do so, knowing that them doing so would perpetuate a pretty brutal American prison system, and that money that could have been taken out of that system and put into something else is instead going to be kept in that system? You can do this with any, it doesn't have to be that. If you don't like the comparison, just replace it with any number of bad thing that America is doing. This logic, it's just, that logic doesn't make sense, and it was also not what Lauren Boebert was saying, and I'm giving her way too much credit. Next one. This is something I had to talk about. This is something I had to talk about because the hypocrisy is so heavy. It's so heavy. This was the thing that made me know I had to do this segment, trying to connect these two topics. Let me read these two tweets. This is from Ryan Knight. You cannot occupy, colonize, and steal people's land and then expect peace. You kill peace the moment you subjugate an entire group of people. Conversely, you create peace when all people are liberated and free. Jill Stein responds, when a murderous occupation makes peaceful resistance impossible and makes violent resistance inevitable. Why doesn't this apply to Ukrainians? If you go listen to Jill Stein talk about Ukrainians, after the 2014 war in the Donbass region, the Minsk II agreement laid out a roadmap to peace in Ukraine, but the U.S. kept pouring weapons into Ukraine and peddling the pipe dream of NATO membership, sabotaging the actual solution for security and peace in Ukraine. This was said the day after the Russians invading. The Russians were raping and murdering their way across Ukraine, and she was like, oh, if only those Ukrainians would have negotiated a little harder against their invaders and occupiers. But when it comes to the Palestinians, who, when you talk about the military strength they have at their disposal to push back against the Israeli occupation, it's not nearly what the Ukrainians have. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement and Hamas do not have very effective air defense. The Ukrainians have much better air defense to protect their civilians. The amount of civilian casualties that have happened in the war in Ukraine has drastically gone down. That doesn't mean they're still not dying. We all saw what happened in Hazra. One out of every 6 people in the village murdered. Horrible. But the amount of civilian casualties is going down. The amount of civilian casualties we're going to see in Palestine is only going to go up the longer this goes on. Is only going to go up as a percentage, as the retaliatory bombing campaign increases, and almost inevitably, the amount of Palestinians that died are going to outpace the amount of Israelis that died. As long as the bombing campaign continues, and Netanyahu's in office, and he's going to continue to do that, that's inevitably going to happen. Why the double standard? I'll tell you why the double standard. Because Ukraine is an ally of America and Palestine isn't. And Ryan Knight and Jill Stein are both reflectively anti-America. That's all it is. You know, they used to call these, I think they used to call them campists back in the day in like the 60s. When all those leftists wore turtlenecks and sweater vests. Or one of those berets. But it's absolutely hypocritical. I want to see Ryan Knight, Jill Stein, and all of these hacks that are on the rooftops cheering for Palestinian liberation to apply their standards equally to the largest war in Europe since World War II and the largest liberation struggle in Europe since World War II. You cannot talk about fighting colonialism here and then try to enable colonialism over here. Absolutely nonsense. Next, Trump claims Hamas would not have attacked Israel if he was president, and Russia would not have invaded Ukraine.
Level of aggression. They didn't have that level of aggression with me. They didn't have it. This would have never happened with me either. You know what wouldn't have happened? Ukraine wouldn't have happened. Taiwan and all this tough talk with Taiwan wouldn't have happened. And what's going on with Israel right now, people were shocked. I wasn't shocked. Because 2 weeks ago, we gave them $6 billion.
Okay. No, I already said the thing about the $6 billion. But the thing about Taiwan is there's been multiple reports coming out showing that Donald Trump, or alleging at the very, I'll be fair, alleging that Donald Trump was telling his administration officials to pull back higher ranking diplomats from Taiwan because the Chinese would call him and complain about it. And every time we'd pull back. And it got to the point where he yelled in a meeting, stop telling me about fucking Hong Kong and Taiwan. And our diplomats got lower in status because Donald Trump, through his years in business, prioritizes those personal relationships. Problem is, in statescraft, while that might be helpful to a little bit to grease the gears, he overemphasized how important that was, and it allowed him to cloud his judgment and lead him against things that are and lead him in the direction against things that are in the national security interests of the United States. 50% of the world's microchips are made in Taiwan, including the vast majority of the high quality microchips, but also against keeping peace in the peninsula, against our support for Taiwan. He's showing what I would call, and probably Trump would call if Biden did it, weakness, and expecting China not to take advantage of it. And saying that, oh, no, they wouldn't have done that under my presidency. If you're pulling back all these diplomats and yelling about how you don't want to hear about Taiwan anymore, what message does that send to China? Compare that to Biden's position, which has been low-key saying we will come to Taiwan's defense militarily if they're invaded, which his White House used to keep rolling back because he keeps saying it again and again and again. I mean, Trump's stance seems a lot weaker. But as for the idea that he could have stopped what was happening between Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Israel, I mean, the occupation has been going on for, 67 years? Just go back all the way to 1948. Trump's going to come in here, spit on his hand, stick it out, and just get a deal? He tried that for 4 years. He even got something semi-negotiated. It wasn't really negotiated. And proposed that the Palestinians immediately rejected the peace plan put forward by Netanyahu's government. Failed. So Trump's record on bringing peace between the Palestinians and Israel is currently 0-1, and he's saying that it's impossible that this type of thing could have happened under his watch. I like that no matter the foreign policy issue, for Donald Trump, the solution is always just give him more power. Now let's talk about some of the silliest stuff related to Ukraine. Here is Dmitry Medvedev, the former president of Russia and a close ally of Vladimir Putin, who has been with him since he was on the campaign trail in the late 1990s, early 2000s. One of the few people from that time period who are still with him. Here is him talking about the attacks on Israel from the Gaza Strip. Well, NATO buddies, you really got it, haven't you? The weapons handed to the Nazi regime in Ukraine are now being actively used against Israel, and it's only going to get worse. Do expect missiles, tanks, and quite soon, planes fresh from Kiev in the black market. So, there's been no evidence that weapons given to Ukraine by the West have ended up in Hamas's hands, or Palestinian Islamic Jihad's hands, or Hezbollah's hands, or the hands of really anyone. Certainly not tanks, and certainly not planes. Haven't seen anything for missiles either. All the things I hear about weapons disappearing is like a box of grenades here, or like a box of machine guns here. And we certainly don't know where that ended up. A lot more likely that if those things are disappearing, that they ended up in some like organized crime circuit. Not Hamas. Why would Ukraine allow that to happen, considering how bad they want Israel to send its old air defense systems and help them further with air defense? It doesn't make any sense. We see Zelensky right now sticking his neck out, trying to support Israel. Why would he do this? It doesn't even make any sense. So you would assume, since Dmitry Medvedev provided no evidence, and it doesn't really make any sense, that nobody would buy it. That's not true, though. This guy did. This guy is a knuckle-dragging, window-licking, oxygen thief, dingback. Honestly, if we were trying to look for the missing link between humans and monkeys, we probably have to start somewhere around here. Okay, I think this is a good place to start. I'm not saying he's it, but I'm saying whatever the missing link was, he holds the most of in his soul. All very true. What has been done here is unforgivable and unforgettable. He has no evidence of this. He had nothing. He just threw it out. He just bought his stuff at face value and then just keep moving on. As the host of the Joey Mario show and a social media strategist. Wow. If there's anyone we need to hear talk about the war in Ukraine or the struggle between Palestine and Israel, it's social media strategists. Here's one from the Sears Report, which is a pretty large, OSCENT account. You couldn't make this up. It appears Western weapons, which were supposed to be shipped to Ukraine, ended up being sold in the black market to Hamas, who are now using them against Israeli forces. You can make it up. In fact, he did make it up. You can see it in the added context thing right below it. Unfounded/unverified. Nothing. Unfounded/unverified. So obviously you can make it up. Here's one from Donald Trump Jr. How is it possible that I've seen more videos out of this war in Israel in a few hours than I have from Ukraine in almost 2 years? And he wasn't the only person to say that. Elon Musk also said something pretty similar. Wall Street Silver said, mainstream media has shown more war footage of Israel/Hamas in the past 2 days than we have seen of Ukraine in the past 2 years. Why? And then post an image on mainstream media. Why have we seen more footage in a war of Israel 2 hours than quote unquote war in Ukraine for 2 years? You can see the war is in quotation marks to suggest that the war in Ukraine isn't real. Then Elon Musk, the richest man on the planet and owner of X, also known as Twitter, responded, odd. Oh, what an inquiry that needs to be made into this. Oh my God, I wonder why the recent news is getting more coverage than the war that started a year and a half ago. My God, I can't figure it out. Certainly can't figure it out. I wonder why the largest wave of violence between Israel and Palestine since 1973 is getting a little bit of attention. Putting that aside, there is so much footage from security cams, GoPros, from civilians on their phones, from military on their phones, from independent journalists, from mainstream media, and from alt media, and from everywhere in between. There are so many hours upon hours upon hours of footage of this war. I don't think it'd be an exaggeration to say this is one of the most documented wars in human history. You know, when you're walking around near the front line, you could be spotted at any time because there's eyes everywhere, eyes in the skies because of drones that are often recording. There is plenty of footage to go. More than enough footage to go through to last a lifetime. Merely have to search for it. If you can't find it, because you're not looking hard enough. That's the first thing. The second thing is, Elon Musk gets a lot of his news and a lot of his updates from Twitter. And I know that because he's saying right now, or he said before he deleted it, that he's getting a lot of his updates about the war from Ascent accounts. Well, he then deleted that tweet where he's saying he was getting that news from the war from Ascent accounts after some stuff came forward that the Ascent accounts that he was shouting out, War Monitors and Scent Defender, you know, said them things like mind your own business Jews and called Ukrainian slurs and, you know, was generally not that most accurate. He then started arguing with them on Twitter about whether calling Hamas fighters martyrs is the way to go, and then he deleted it. But point is, this shows that he gets a decent amount of his news and a decent amount of his updates from Twitter. A lot of people do that. And that's not necessarily to mean that you read these paragraph upon paragraph tweets that people are putting out there now, but maybe you just look for article headlines, and then you go Google the hard article headlines later. But what you see on Twitter is going to be affected by the algorithm. The algorithm ultimately will decide what goes in front of you and what stays away from you. And so my comment would be, is if Elon Musk is getting his news and updates from Twitter and he's not seeing the war footage, maybe there's something wrong about the algorithm, that it's not properly showing and motivating people to watch or putting in the feeds of people the piles upon piles of war crime footage and piles upon piles of footage of just the war in general that is already on the platform, posted by freelance journalists like me and others. Guess he's not looking that. Lastly, I wanted to check one last thing on this topic before ending stream, because Danabo has to edit this and he has work very early in the morning, is a Glenn Beck segment. I don't really watch Glenn Beck very often. He kind of seems like a kind of bygone conservative political commentator. I don't hear much about him anymore. You know, the times, they are changing. Anyway, he still does do a show, though. He still has a decent enough viewership. And he wanted to talk about recently how America simply can't both support Ukraine and Israel. We got some interesting takes in this. Let's listen.
Iran is now threatening Azerbaijan. They just put out, Azerbaijan, you're left without an ally. Revenge will come to you, which is bizarre because Azerbaijan is actually trying to kill the Armenian Christians by Azerbaijan and Turkey. And you'd think Iran would be for that and Israel would be against that, but Israel is supporting Azerbaijan. Armenia is being supported by Iran. Now, how can we support?
Now, I don't know if Glenn Beck knows this or if he has the knowledge to dig into this or he just didn't want to. But the reason why Iran is supporting Armenia, which is, you know, a Muslim country supporting a Christian country, because geopolitics isn't just religion. A lot of times geopolitics is just practicality, just like reality smacking you in the face. In Iran's case, they want to dominate the region and they fear very, very much Turkish domination of the Middle East. Because if the Turks dominate the Middle East, then how are they going to dominate the Middle East? And so to see the Azerbaijanis moving into Nagorno-Karabakh and possibly moving into Armenian territory proper, which they have done in the last 2 years, have violated Armenia's internationally recognized territorial claims. Not claims, their territory, what is internationally recognized as their territory. And every single time something happens like that, Iran comes out and it beats its chest super hard because they don't want Azerbaijan and a Turkish ally to get too much power and shift the balance of power too much in favor of Turkey. So even though, you know, Iran and Armenia are very different, their interests align specifically when it comes to countering Turkish or Azerbaijani military action.
I mean, I'm for selling arms to Israel. I'm all for that. They can afford it. They can buy them. But I worry about our armaments. I mean, the United States cannot fight really more than one front at this point. We don't have the people. We just gave 7 years worth of our missiles to Ukraine, which means it will take us 7 years to make up for them.
By the way, he says of our missiles. There's many different missiles in the U.S. arsenal. Like, we haven't given them any ATACMS yet. So, obviously, not that he's talking about. He must be talking about a different type of missile. But also, we spend more on our military than any other nation on the planet. Over $850
You sit behind a computer and do a debate. It's ridiculous.
We've funneled money and money and money and money and so much money into our armed forces. You would think with the amount of money we spend on the military, our military production capacity would be a little flexible. It'd be a little bendable. If we snap, you would think with how much money we spend on the armed forces, you know, the defense companies would say, money? Yes, I'll jump how high? And then they jump. But production of these artillery shells has been quite slow. Why is that? Why is it that we don't have enough to supply ourselves at the immediately right now? And he's exaggerating this, right? Let me emphasize that. But there is a shortage of these supplies to at least some extent. Riverboat Jack, thank you so much for the raid. I appreciate it. The reason is that we've been fighting low-intensity conflicts all around the globe. We're fighting rebels in caves in Afghanistan. We're fighting Somali pirates. We're fighting in the Sahel in Niger. We're not fighting big armies with large artillery reserves that bombard positions, and so we need the counter battery fire. Our enemies really suck at shooting back. The Afghan Taliban just doesn't have the missiles that we have. The intensity in the ammunition usage of the war in Ukraine is so radically different. The United States and most of Europe were not prepared for a war like this. And I do think, considering how much money we spend on the defense industry, that we should have a semi-flexible defense industry. And artillery shell production is picking up. It is picking up. And I think it could pick up further, definitely when it comes to artillery shell production, which is going to be necessary for Ukraine to win. But the idea that we're going to run out when we've spent like 3-4%, 0.3, 0.4% of our GDP on the war in Ukraine, that we somehow couldn't also deal with another crisis at the same time. Number one, it depends on what type of weapons the Israelis would even be asking for. If the Israelis are asking for air defense, that's different than the missile stockpiles that he's talking about. Man, Glenn Beck. But let's listen more. This is like the more mild criticisms I have. Let's listen until later.
It'll take us 7 years to manufacture those. So I don't know. Can we fight one front, let alone two fronts? And I got news for you. Israel and Ukraine on fire. If I'm China, I think I got it pretty made here going into Taiwan at any given time.
The thing is, it is true that other security crises around the world would make it easier for China to invade Taiwan. But China is currently not in a position, according to most military analysts in most war game scenarios, they're not in a position to take the island right now. They're just not. They said they haven't built up their navy enough. They haven't built up their forces enough. Most analysts say that they would probably fail. We don't know for sure. You know, rubber hits the road, as it were. But the odds are still against them. The longer time goes on and the more they build up their navy, and the more disproportionate the size and funding of their navy and military forces compared to Taiwan goes, the longer the time goes on under those conditions, then that'll change. If the United States doesn't support Taiwan with the Taiwan's Relations Act, been in place since 1979, and basically states that we give Taiwan whatever is necessary and sell Taiwan whatever is necessary in order to deter a Chinese invasion. But I agree that they'd like chaos, but the idea that they're like getting ready to invade right now is this is kind of fear-mongering.
Look, there's almost nothing we would do, I think, to stop that at this point. And even if we had the resources, I'm not sure this administration would do anything.
What's great about that statement is how unbelievably fucking ignorant it is. And this guy right here, he is the missing link. So Joe Biden has been stronger on Taiwan than Donald Trump. Joe Biden has been stronger on Taiwan than Joe Biden. Has been stronger than Taiwan than Obama. And I think there's an argument to be made that he's stronger than George Bush on the issue of Taiwan. Certainly stronger than Nixon. I mean, he's probably one of the most strong on Taiwan of any president since the creation of the Taiwanese state. He is the first president to come out and publicly say, if Taiwan is invaded, America will defend it. Now, every time he says it, his statement is rolled back. But you need to notice something when that statement is rolled back. He goes back and he says it again and again and again. I think this could be a state of affairs where he's trying to get the point across while also not breaking the status quo. He's trying to get the point across that, you know, it is still technically strategic ambiguity. But I'm making it very clear where I lean. He's not pulling back diplomats that are too high-ranking like the Trump administration did. I think Joe Biden, of any modern president, has shown more willingness to come to the defense of Taiwan as China's more powerful than it has been in its modern history than any other recent U.S. president. So I just think this is ignorant. I just think this is purposefully ignoring Joe Biden's position.
To try to stand up for Taiwan?
No.
We're at the point where we're firing NBA executives when they stand up for Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And then
What stupid fucking analysis? What does that have to do with Joe Biden? An NBA executive gets fired 3 years ago before Joe Biden was in office, and that means that Joe Biden would not defend Taiwan. These topics are completely unrelated in any way. Just throwing out fucking nonsense that he's remembering on the spot.
And that just happened, and kind of they rolled over Hong Kong, and we all just kind of sat there and didn't do anything.
That was during the Trump administration.
Going to be a really interesting year, isn't it?
Okay, what is the Democrats' position on this? Oh,
That was during. Does he not know that the Hong Kong protesters happened under Trump's watch? And there's reports of Trump saying, "Stop telling me about the fucking Hong Kong protest," in response to staffers trying to get him to do something because he didn't care. Because he's the type of guy that gets a hard on when he sees a protester getting beaten by the cops. Come on, man.
this is all coincidence. Our guy's been in there this whole time, and all this stuff has gone on, and it's all a coincidence. It could have happened under any president. It just happened to be ours. But that's just a coincidence. It's got nothing to do with how bad of a president he is and what sort of...
He's just throwing stuff at the wall. These conflicts all have... This is like America is the center of the world, and America controls everything. And so if anything happens anywhere, it's America's fault immediately. And it's Joe Biden's fault specifically. What would Donald Trump have done differently before the Russians invaded Ukraine that would have stopped an invasion? Once you ask that question, it completely falls apart. What would Trump have done differently when it comes to Palestine and Israel that would have stopped Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad from launching this gigantic operation? Do you think he would have addressed the poverty in Gaza, the blockade, the illegal occupation, the expansion of settlements? No, we saw the peace deal he put forward, and it failed. And it failed. If Donald Trump wanted to stop what is happening right now between Palestine and Israel, he had 4 years to do it as president, and he failed. He had 4 years to deal with the war in the Donbass and the occupation of Crimea, and he failed. And he failed. Get this shit out of here. This is ridiculous. Arena Albatross, thank you so much for the primer.
messages he's been sending to our enemies.
Well, I'm glad they just phone. They're glad you get it.
Yeah, because that's really what they seem to be saying.
It is.
Which is...
It's not our fault.
Incredibly... I can't even come up with a word for it.
Last week, Jake Sullivan came out and said that the Middle East is quieter than it's been in 2 decades. Yes, because they were all applauding the destruction of Israel. I mean...
What is that point even? What? Okay, I don't know if you guys seen the clip, but when you listen to him talk about, he's talking about American assets in Iraq. He's talking about, I think he talked about everything but Palestine, Israel. And nothing he talked about, like, issues that they were able to settle or issues they were able to deal with. For example, negotiations in Yemen. None of that had to do with what he just mentioned. None of it had to do with, we didn't really know how to deal with the Middle East, but then we decided we'd work with all of our Middle Eastern colleagues to push the Jews into the sea. And that's when we really came together. That didn't happen. That just...
Good heavens.
Unbelievable.
Elections have consequences. And this election really had consequences. Imagine the consequences of the next one.
Again, it's just he's directly pinning the invasion on Biden. Could it not be that the Israeli government caused it? Is it impossible to think that, maybe 67 years of blockading might have caused violence to spiral out? Could it not be Hamas that caused it? Why does it have to be Joe Biden? On one hand, I hear from certain isolationist Republicans, and now Glenn Beck's less like this, but on one hand, I'll hear America should not be the policeman in the world. Then the next thing I'll hear is everything that happens in the world that's wrong while a Democrat is the president is their fault. How do you balance these two things? How do you make these two things not collide? Have to blame Joe Biden for every single foreign policy issue that happens anywhere in the world because he's president, and you gotta just find some way to you gotta find something to attack him on. You can't take the moment to reflect on why this violence is happening, on how you can end the violence permanently, try to find a peace deal that makes both sides maybe not happy, but at least satisfied enough to not kill each other. But instead, he just wants to drag Joe Biden through the mud. Use the dead Palestinians and Israelis to drag Joe Biden through the mud. Something that he had, again, very minimal to no impact on. Glenn Beck, everyone, the moderate conservative.